All right, welcome to Hoops Tonight here at The Volume. Happy Friday, everybody. Hope all of you guys had a great week. Got a jam-packed show for you today. We're doing a mailbag. Going to be bouncing all around the league, hitting a bunch of different teams. You guys know the drill. Before we get started, subscribe to the Hoops Tonight YouTube channel so you don't miss any more of our videos. Follow me on Twitter at _JasonLT so you guys don't miss show announcements. Don't forget about our podcast feed, wherever you get your podcasts under Hoops Tonight. Don't forget, it's also helpful if you leave a rating and a review for us on that front. We also have brand new social media feeds on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Hoops Tonight social media feeds. We're going to be releasing a bunch more content this year, so make sure you follow us there. And then keep dropping mailbag questions in the YouTube comments. Our plan as of now is to at least either do, like today, a solo mailbag or at least a mailbag at the tail end of the show every Friday. And I'm going to be grabbing questions from Twitter and on the YouTube comments. So make sure you keep dropping your questions in there. And then last but not least, before we get started, I wanted to talk to you guys about Game Time. They have an incredible ticket buying experience. I've personally used them many times. They've consistently given me the best experience I've had ever using a ticket buying app. I'm really glad that we've had this partnership with them for as long as we have. It's a product I really believe in. I want you guys to check it out. This is the best time to get out and see an event. We have the NBA in full swing, the NFL in full swing, college basketball is in full swing, college football is in full swing. Everybody's going right now, and we have concerts and comedy shows. You got to get out and see one of these events. As much fun as it is watching on our couch, there's nothing like being there in person where you could see the body language of the players and coaches, watch the way they communicate, feel the energy of the crowd shifting throughout the game. There's just nothing like being there in person. And Game Time gives you a really smooth ticket buying experience. You can get in and out in as few as 2 taps. You get all-in pricing, so you know exactly what you're paying when you go to check out. You get a view of your app, or your ticket view of your seat within the app, so you know what you're buying with your money. And then they have this new program called Game Time Picks. You know how like sometimes you click on an event and there's just thousands of tickets and it's difficult to sort through? Game Time Picks curates that feed so that you only see the best deals from that event so that you can be more efficient with your searching process. It's an excellent experience. I want you guys to check it out. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code HOOPS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code HOOPS. That's HOOPS for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right, let's talk some basketball. If only one possible trade can be made, what would be more essential for the Lakers? Prioritizing an athletic guard who can defend and create, or a backup big who can defend? This has been the big question surrounding the Lakers coming into this year. And there's been a lot of talk about like, oh, should they go after Kessler Edwards? Should they go after Robert Williams? Should they be hunting a center that can anchor units when AD's off the floor and give them a better chance of contending when AD needs to sit out a game? And I totally understand that point of view, for the record. And I certainly would like to have a better backup center option than Jackson Hayes. That said, I think by far the biggest issue with this roster is the lack of perimeter athleticism. We were talking about this with the Nerd Sesh guys on Wednesday, if you guys remember, but it's been like one of the biggest lessons I've learned in the league over the last year or so, extending into the tail end of last year and this year, where it's like your ability to cover ground in rotation and cover ground in transition and get up into ball handlers with ball pressure is such an underrated part of today's game. Just go look at the metrics. Like, these teams are playing in transition damn near 20% of the game at this point. Like 1/5 of the basketball is being played in an up and down setting with guys flying around the floor in transition. You need speed. You need athleticism on the perimeter. You need guys that can guard the ball. And the Lakers, when you look at their perimeter core, it's in terms of athletes, like they've got other perimeter players, but when you're looking at athletes, like guys that can really kind of cover ground, it's like Dalton Knecht, who's a rookie and at this point hasn't been able to turn his athleticism into really functional defense yet. There's Gabe Vincent, who can't put the ball in the basket for whatever reason. Like it's like he's 1 for 4, 1 for 5 every single game. Max Christie, who I really think could be a useful 3-and-D player if he ever embraced being a 3-and-D player, but he's just convinced he's going to be more of an on-ball creator. And I just think he's a really immature offensive player right now. So at this point, you almost have to go a different direction just because he's been so bad to start the season. And Jared Vanderbilt, who's always hurt, and Cam Reddish, who is a NBA journeyman, who brings some functional athleticism, but is so limited offensively that he becomes very difficult to play. So like all of the perimeter athletes on the Lakers come with massive question marks. When you look at their actual like playable rotation guys, It's Austin Reeves, average to below average athlete. D'Angelo Russell, below average athlete. Rui Hachimura is very big and definitely a decent athlete, but he's not what I would consider to be a fast player. LeBron James, who's fast when he wants to be, but he's 40 years old, and so he's not going to be fast the majority of the time. And AD, who's fast for a center, but he's not going to be covering ground on the perimeter, doing all the work that the Lakers need from their perimeter core. And so when you combine that being just such a big weakness on this Laker roster, which, by the way, I've been complaining about this exact weakness on this exact roster for more than 2 years now. This has been the consistent thing that I've pointed to. They're not athletic enough at the guards. They're not athletic enough after the guards. Right after the Western Conference Finals appearance, I said going into the season, they need to make a D'Angelo Russell trade because they are not athletic enough in the backcourt. This is something I've been consistently tied in on, and it's only become exacerbated by the fact that my view of the game has shifted towards valuing that type of skill, or I should say that type of roster trade more than anything else. So given the option, if the Lakers could only make one trade, I would prefer them go find some functional perimeter athleticism. Same thing goes for that backup center spot where it's like when you're talking about backup center for a guy like Anthony Davis who's going to play a lot. Again, this is not Dallas where they're splitting their center minutes more closer to the middle, right? Or a team like Golden State who's holding Draymond in the mid to high 20s in his minutes, right? Like Anthony Davis is going to play 35 minutes a game in the regular season and 40 plus minutes a game in the playoffs. So like the benefit of having a really good backup center is real on the stretches of the game when AD's out, and God forbid if he misses some time. But like in the idealized version of your team, that's a player you're not using very often. And like, again, maybe if you want to go huge, if you can find a caliber center that you can play next to Anthony Davis, that seems appealing on the defensive end. But here we are a little chunk into the season, and Anthony Davis is still not shooting the three ball particularly well or particularly often. So, like, I don't know that you can really get away with that unless Anthony Davis becomes a knockdown shooter, and he just hasn't been to this point. So, like, ideally, I'd like to have both, but if I could only have one, I would take an athletic guard who can defend and create over a backup center for the Lakers. Next question. Hey, Jason, love your content. It turns out that the Nets have too many good role players and have become competent, which is bad because they need to be in the Cooper flag stakes. What would be your thoughts on a Schroeder, Dorian Finney-Smith trade for D'Lo and another player to match contracts in a pick trade? So Dorian Finney-Smith is a guy that everybody should be looking at. Dennis Schroeder to me is a really good player. I loved him when he was with the Lakers. I thought he defended hard. I thought he was super competitive. I thought he brought dribble penetration, which was really important. Like, is he a guy that you want in your starting five if you're a dead serious championship team? No, but like I would take him as a backup guard over many of the options that are around the NBA. I think Dorian Finney-Smith is kind of a prototypical 3-and-D wing. I think he's a guy that could help a lot of teams. Even like a guy like Zaire Williams is a guy that brings real functional athleticism to the perimeter that could be had for cheap. And so like teams like Brooklyn, other teams around the NBA that either but you're talking about them overperforming, but we got to look out for teams that underperform too over time that might look to decide to flip players. The Clippers are a team I could see. I would see teams targeting Terrence Mann. I would see teams targeting Derrick Jones Jr. closer to the deadline. There's a lot of perimeter athleticism that is not playing for top-tier championship contenders out there that can be had. And you just got to kind of have to look around and wait for that right opportunity to pop up. To me, I look at it as like Rui is the more functional piece between him and D'Lo. I think both of them have their issues. Rui's played 2 playoff runs with the Lakers. I thought he was awesome in 2023. I thought he was really bad in 2024, albeit it was in one small series that was only 5 games long, right? So, like, if I had to choose between those 2 guys, I'd prefer to keep Rui. So, like, I'm looking at a really athletic guard that can defend at the point of attack, fly around in transition, slot Austin Reeves properly as a backup, or not a backup, but as a secondary perimeter defender so that he's guarding the other team's second best player instead of best player. And then I think things kind of fall into order. So, like, if the Clippers continue to struggle, Terrence Mann is a guy that I would love to have playing the 2 next to Austin Reeves. If Bruce Brown could get healthy, he's like the perfect example of this type of archetype. Like, keeping an eye out for a really athletic 2 that has some strength to him, that is also a functional offensive player. That's the type of guy I'd be looking at. We'll see how it shapes out over time. These trade markets, they're so volatile and they shift all the time that it's really hard to zero in on one particular guy. But to me, it's like starting caliber between I'd say 6'4" at the lowest, but between 6'4" and 6'6", 6'7", at least 220 pounds of like solid functional strength and a really good athlete who at least just knows how to play alongside other good basketball players is the type of guy I'd be looking for. I hate looking into this so much, but why did Paul George have the ball at the end of the Sixers game with Maxey ball watching? Also, are Joel, Maxey, and Paul George going to have to make the required sacrifices like 08 Boston did to win? Second part's obviously yes, right? Like all of them are going to have to. Embiid can't play completely in a heliocentric manner because he's got to try to keep Paul George and Tyrese Maxey in rhythm. You can't just let Tyrese Maxey and Joel Embiid run two-man game and turn Paul George into just solely Michael Porter Jr. because that's going to be a misallocation of resources. You got to run action. You got to keep everybody involved. And so certainly navigating that balance is going to be a big part of Philly's success. I watched the end of that game, the Sixers-Suns game. That was just unbelievable because Kevin Durant just completely took over that game. I live in Tucson too, so it was like difficult for me to track down a stream of that game, but I was able to watch it. It's just all these stupid politics with these regional networks and how difficult it is to get their games when you live inside when you live in those particular areas. Anyway, the random soapbox. But when it comes to the end of that Sixers game, like I saw lots of people complaining, like, "Oh, Paul George looked off Tyrese Maxey, blah blah blah," and I get it. I think Tyrese is a better player than Paul George. I ranked Tyrese in the top 25 for me, and I did not rank Paul George, right? Like, I'm a big fan of Tyrese Maxey, big believer in who he is. That said, like, there is something to be said about, like, the big pull-up shooter being sometimes a safer option in those late game situations. So, for instance, let's just take the last two shots that both players took. So, the last shot Paul George took was a pull-up jump shot around the top of the key. Long two. Yeah, I agree with some of the criticisms like, okay, I'd rather have Paul George take a three there. Yeah, I agree with you for the record. But it was a good look at a shot that Paul George definitely can make, and he missed it. Tyrese Maxey's last shot, and again, the big difference there is he's a speed guard who's smaller and not as physically strong. So we talk about this like, it's like the Steph Curry versus Kevin Durant thing. Like, you could argue Steph Curry's a better player, but if I'm in a singular possession and I need a guy to just get a shot for the 2017 Warriors, it's probably KD, because KD can hit into a high hesitation and wait for the defender to buckle a little bit, and he can get a decent look at a pull-up jump shot whenever he wants. Whereas with Steph, like, he can run around and make moves and do whatever he wants to do, but if like a really good defender stays attached, what Steph doesn't have is like that ability to get quick, immediate separation for a shot off over the top, right? Same goes for Tyrese Maxey. Like, that floater that he took in the ball screen, like, it was not a good shot. It was heavily contested. It had almost no chance of going in. And that's not to say that Tyrese or a guy like Steph is incapable of creating their own shot. Of course they are. But like, I'm just saying it's defensible. I think it's defensible that Paul George was the better option for them to go in that specific situation. Prefer he takes a three. Also, Paul George didn't really have it going that game. Like, he was kind of out of rhythm. So like, that's the other counterpoint is like, I would also understand if Tyrese Maxey took over the offense at the tail end of the game because he's the better player who's more in rhythm, who's been playing more lately and has his legs underneath him, is in better shape. Like, I understand that too, but like, I just didn't think it was as egregious as some of the comments that I saw on Twitter, just simply because Paul George is 6'8", 6'9", and he got a decent amount of separation and had a pretty clean look. He just missed it. And like, I think that those big, tall wings have that ability to, on a spot, just kind of rise and fire. And I'm always going to view that as a viable option for late game offense. I mean, Kevin Durant's been straight up stealing games for the Phoenix Suns with that kind of shot making. What is your favorite offense to watch in the NBA? I thought about this one a lot, and there's a lot of, it's interesting because they're different, right? Like, I really enjoy watching Boston's offense because they're the best drive and kick team. So like there's a visually appealing element to drive and kick basketball when guys get in the lane and make reads and it's like drive, kick, drive, kick, drive, kick. Now we get a wide open shot, making the extra pass with that like relentless like rim pressure from guys driving the basket. I've really enjoyed watching Boston's offense over the course of the tail end of last year and the beginning of this year. I really like watching Denver's offense for a completely different reason, right? Like Nikola Jokic, the way that he can manipulate help side defense and generate openings for his teammates is really fascinating to me. His passing connection with Aaron Gordon on the baseline is something that I've always found really fun to watch. I think tough shot making is fun. So guess what? I do enjoy watching Jamal Murray hit tough step back jump shots. I do enjoy watching the Suns and watching Kevin Durant and Devin Booker just hit tough shot after tough shot. I've always, as a basketball fan and as a guy who plays the game at a certain, like I played in college and I still play as an adult for fun all the time, I enjoy watching those things. But if I had to pick a single offense, I'd probably say the Golden State Warriors. And the main reason why is I find their 5-out ball and player movement to be the most visually appealing in the league. It's literally like a blender. There's nobody, even with all the teams that run 5-out and all the teams that run some similar actions, there are teams that copy Warriors split action now. There are teams that copy a lot of the Warriors like Chicago, like dribble handoff stuff with guys back cutting out of it and all the different things that the Warriors do. There's a lot of teams that are copying it, but nobody does it as often or as effectively as the Golden State Warriors do in terms of their ball and player movement. And it's just really fun to watch. And I'm really, really excited to see it in the next couple of weeks too, because they've got some tougher matchups for them. The Emirates NBA Cup is here, and you can win big getting in on the action at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All 30 teams split into 6 groups every Tuesday and Friday, playing for the right to advance in a single elimination in-season tourney, culminating in the NBA Cup Championship in Vegas. Right now, the Boston Celtics are favored to win the NBA Cup at plus 370. The Oklahoma City Thunder have the second best odds at plus 600, and then the New York Knicks have the third best odds at plus 900. First time, here's something special just for you. New DraftKings customers bet $5 to get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins. Score big with DraftKings Sportsbook. Every point counts. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code HOOPS. That's HOOPS. That's code HOOPS for new customers to get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. What should we look for in the Warriors' next 3 games to indicate they could be a serious team regardless of whether they win or lose? Keep it up. Not all Warriors fans think you're a hater. I appreciate the kind words. For the record, I always say this to you guys, but there are far more of you guys that are kind and who are willing to have discussion and are willing to appreciate the dynamic between like, hey, this is just my opinion, this is your opinion, let's talk about it. There are far more of you guys than the nasty, disrespectful people. And spend any time online as an adult and you find out pretty quickly there's lots of nasty, disrespectful people. So like Fortunately, at this point, I'm getting close to 3 years into working with the volume. I've gotten pretty used to it, and I just kind of shake it off and move on. But I do always appreciate you guys that bring kindness and respect, because that's always the stuff that just keeps me going. So I sincerely appreciate it. So the Warriors heading into a tough little road trip here, right? Playing the Celtics tonight. Super excited to watch that game. They play the Cavs, I believe, and then who's the third team? Is it the Knicks? I think. But they're playing a couple of really tough road games at this point in the season. And I was actually talking about this with the nerds the other day at Thunder. So it's at Celtics, at Cavs, at Thunder, then home for the Mavs. So I was talking about this with the nerds on Wednesday, but like I'm specifically really excited to watch their defense. So like we all know that the ceiling of the Warriors comes down to whether or not Steph can get back to a top 10, top 5 type of level, right? And who's their secondary shot creator, whether that's in-house, like, oh, suddenly Buddy Hield after 600 games as a pro becomes an all-star level shot creator. That's our guy. Or maybe Andrew Wiggins has a kind of a renaissance to what he was in 2022, right? Like, or it's a trade where they bring in a high-powered star, right? Whatever that is. We know that the ceiling of the Warriors is going to come down to Steph returning to superstar form, like super-duper star form, and who's their number 2, right? That's their ceiling. And I don't think we're going to know that for a while. I don't expect Steph to play like the best player in the world tonight against Boston. I mean, maybe he will, but like I shouldn't even say against Boston. In the next 4-game stretch, I don't expect Steph to just play like the best player in the world. He's just coming back from an injury. He played on a minutes restriction in their last game. It would be absurd to expect him to go into these next 4 games and average 35 points a game on 70% true shooting and just light the world on fire, right? But I do think it's realistic that by the end of the season, at some time between now and the end of the season, after getting a bunch of games under his belt, when he gets into game shape and he's consistently playing 35 minutes a night, I think there's a chance that Steph could get back to that level. But we're probably not going to see it in these specific games tonight, right? In this next week. So what can we learn in the next couple of games for the Warriors? How legit is this defense? What can this defense do? I talked about it with the nerds. We argued about who is more likely to be a championship threat, the Cavs or the Warriors. And even though the Cavs have more talent, the reason why I picked the Warriors is the Warriors are super fast on the perimeter and can contain the ball pretty well. The Cavs still have some big entry points, right? They still have some guys in their line. Like Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell is still a generally weak defensive backcourt, right? Like whoever it is that they have at the 3, there are guys that they can look to attack there. Jared Allen's a very good defensive anchor, but can he defend in space the way that Draymond Green can? No, right? So there's a lot of things with Cleveland where I'm like, okay, they're great, they're interesting, they're going to be we're going to talk about them in a little bit, but do I think they can guard the Celtics? I don't know, right? Whereas Golden State, they can put out lineups where it's here's Andrew Wiggins, here's, Brandon Podziemski and DeAnthony Melton with Draymond Green, and they're going to switch everything and fly around and contain the ball. And that's the part that I'm looking at is can the Warriors defense really slow down the Celtics offense? Can it really slow down the Thunder offense? Those are the things that I'm looking at as areas for Golden State to show real potential. Because again, the offensive end, if you get a couple of 30-point games out of Steph against the Celtics and the Thunder, you're getting away with murder because he's just coming back from an injury. He's easing his way back into the game. So I'm less worried about the offensive end. I'm more interested in, can the Warriors defense cause any real problems for the Celtics offense and for the Thunder offense? Those are the things that I'm going to be looking very closely at with the Warriors over the course of the next week. Should the Mavs stick with the starting 5, or should they try Klay on the bench for more defense in the starting lineup? I think they should keep Klay with the starters. I don't think there's anybody on the bench that actually is a truly deserving starting caliber player to slot into that spot. Also, I still think the Mavs have their issues. They're slow on the perimeter. They're the Pacers game is a perfect example. They kind of just got run around, right? They just ran circles around them all night. But they're still top 10 defense. They have a very high defensive floor. Why? Because they have lots of rim protection, right? Rim protection is a basic concept that gives you a high defensive floor. They're playing 48 minutes plus of legitimate defensive talent in the front court. So they have a really high floor. So my thing is lean into Kyrie, Klay, and Luka and just try to be the best offensive team that you can within that concept. I don't think there's a version of this Mavs team that is this incredibly stifling perimeter defense anyway. I talked about this with the nerds the other day, but I think if you were ranking the fastest perimeter players on the team in terms of real wing athletes, Derek Jones was number 1, and you're probably putting a guy Josh Green was really fast. Josh Green had speed, right? So this is not the same type of roster. So I would lean into them being a big front line that can defend and protect the rim and just being the best possible offense that you can possibly be, which will come in time as you learn how to incorporate Klay, as you learn how to incorporate all this additional ball handling, as Luka gets back into shape and reaches the form of Luka that we all know that he's capable of being. So I would not tweak the starting lineup, at least not on the perimeter. I mean, we could all talk about whether or not Lively should start over Gafford in the big picture, but that's a different debate. I would not move Klay to the bench. Why does nobody in the NBA media remember what happened in May by the time October comes? Everyone thinks the Cavs are a top 3 team when they started last season 9-1, then got throttled by physicality in the playoffs. Same team, same small backcourt, Cancun by the second week of May. So they are a different team in several different ways because of the way they're playing. They're playing substantially faster than they did last year. They're doing a lot more switching on defense, which is allowing them to force more turnovers, which is allowing them to get out in transition even more. And they've tweaked their offensive approach considerably with the increased usage of Evan Mobley, who's doing a lot more work on the ball, running inverted ball screens, looking to drive, looking to shoot more. They're different in some of those ways. However, I agree that the roster in and of itself kind of is what it is. And my specific issue with the Cavs is they don't match up well with Boston in their ability to really spread them out and the ability to guard Cleveland's guards and make life difficult on them and to wear them down. And so I agree that I'll be surprised if they're, still playing basketball in late May. But at the same time, guys, I think it's completely fair and reasonable for us to I think it's completely fair and reasonable for us to acknowledge when teams are playing really well to start the season. NBA history tells us that championship teams do attack the season from start to finish. We also never know what can happen in the long run. Like, guys, like sometimes, but like, what if Evan Mobley just continues to develop and by the end of the season, he's a 60% true shooting, 20 plus point per game guy, right? Like, we don't know how this is going to go in the big picture. And so again, like, we're just watching trends. And as I said at the end of our last mailbag, you know, I had a question that was like, why do we always pretend like the regular season matters when it doesn't? And it's like, guys, this is the job. Like, the NBA media that you're referencing, their job is to watch the early season games and have an opinion. It'd be pretty boring if we all just came on here every day and we were like, yeah, none of this matters. See you guys in April, right? Like that there's no fun in that. The fun is let's try to learn about these teams. And so when a Cavs team starts 7-0, let's talk about what they're doing differently. Let's talk about what they're good at. And yeah, like, I'm not about to move them into my top tier of contenders. I actually dropped 2 teams off my top tier of contenders in the Nerd Sesh show on Wednesday. Like, I'm going to wait to get more data before I make any sort of big sweeping declaration about the Cavs, but I think it's okay for us to acknowledge that they're off to a really good start. Has the NBA game leaned too heavily into an offense-oriented basketball game? Emphasis on the 3-ball. And if so, are there any changes you would make for defenses so we can see a balanced game / product that mimics the playoffs? So there's been this whole debate around the idea of 3-point shooting. I've talked about it a little bit on the show. My main kind of point of view is essentially that, like, it doesn't really matter what the final shot is. It matters the quality of the basketball. So for instance, Boston takes a ton of threes. I do enjoy watching Boston because they play a really fun brand of drive and kick basketball. There are a lot of teams out there that just shoot bad threes for the sake of getting their 3-point volume up, and that is ugly, right? There are teams that don't take any threes where it's pretty, right? There are teams that don't take many threes where it can get ugly sometimes too. It all just depends on whether or not you're playing quality basketball. Now, as far as like the leaning too much on the offensive end of the floor, I am of the opinion that with how spread out the floor has got, with how talented and skilled these offensive players are, I do think we need to give defensive players more leeway to be more physical in dribble drive situations. So like some of these calls where like a dude is very slightly out of position and there's a slight bump and we end up getting a foul called, I disagree with that. Some of the hand checking and physicality, I wish they would let go a little bit more frequently. By the way, none of this stuff is like by the rule book. Hand checking happens on every single possession that goes uncalled. It's just a question of like how often it does get called. But like I'm just saying within that realm of discretion, I would allow more physicality from the defensive player because I think it would allow them to contain drives more and just give the defense a fighting chance. There are way too many games that just turn into like neither defense can guard the other. And that I think becomes ugly basketball pretty quickly. Do you have an issue with Wemby's shot distribution so far? 8.7 2-point attempts at 59%, 7.1 3-point attempts at 22%. Seems hard for him to get opportunities closer to the basket as teams have been sticking smaller, stout guys on him that he can't beat with a live dribble. What would you change? So this is actually a very similar concept to something we talked about on the show earlier this last week. But this is a team that basically this is a strategy that basically every team in the league has been deploying against Wemby, which is like guard him with the wing, right? We just saw it with the Thunder, right? It was like a steady diet of like Jalen Williams guarding him, Alex Caruso guarding him, like just guarding him with small, stout guys that can get up underneath him because they can beat him to spots and prevent him from driving. A couple of different things. As far as the 3-point shot goes, I think I said the same thing about Anthony Edwards. Like, I don't care if Ant's taking, 11, 12, 13 3-point shots a game if he's making 44, 45% of them, right? Like, that's a debate that you have if he starts missing a lot. Like, if we fast forward a couple months and he's still at 12 attempts a game, but he's shooting 36% on threes, and yeah, we probably should have a conversation about how he should cut that number from 12 down to 8, right? Same thing goes with Wemby. Like, he's shooting really poorly. 7 attempts a game, 22%. It's not good. But I also, like, it's November 6th, guys. Like, I would say, like, if we get to December and he's still taking 7 threes a game and his percentage is still in the low 20s, then there's a conversation to be had. But if he wants to try to build that out, I respect it. I think, like, it's scary to think about what Wemby could be like if he was a high-volume, efficient 3-point shooter in addition to whatever else he does. As far as, like, handling the smaller, stout defenders, that to me is on his own individual skill development. I talked a lot in our last discussion about this, about Dirk Nowitzki and the work he did. 1, fighting for position. 2, being really tight with the basketball, not exposing it so guys couldn't swipe it away. And then 3, being able to get to his shooting pocket efficiently from a kind of like strong tucked position so that he can deal with ball pressure and shoot over the top relatively easily. Dirk was also really good at like leveraging shoulder angles for quick spin offs and rip throughs and stuff like that to get dribble penetration. Dealing with the defenders he's dealing with, that is all about the individual development of Victor Wembanyama. Part of it too is like if teams are gonna put a wing on Victor, they're probably going to put their center on Jeremy Sohan, right? And Jeremy Sohan has a thumb injury; he's going to be out for a little bit. But like, you got to put together lineup groupings where teams can't afford to put their center on someone else. That's on the front office, right? In terms of action, it's tough because like when they put a small on Victor, they're going to switch ball screens, and that's going to make it tougher for you to actually like get Victor Wembanyama the role opportunities that he wants. But like that's the truth is like if he's skinny and guys can get up underneath him and beat him to spots, it's going to be difficult for him to get dribble penetration. So a lot of it's going to come down to his own skill development. This one's a personal one. Was the transition from hooping professionally overseas to coaching/talking hoops hard? What was the most difficult adjustment to it? So first of all, I technically never actually made it overseas to hoop. I tried to, and I signed a deal with a league called the UBA, which was in India, and they paid me for, I think, 2 weeks of work, and then the league folded because of some sort of like international incident involving the Indian players. I don't remember some of the details, but at that point, I made a personal decision. At that point, I had a wife and 2 dogs, and we owned a home, and we were very established in Tucson. My wife works for a local business here in town, so like it just got to the point where I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna focus on moving on with my life, and that's when I got into real estate, and I used real estate as like the flexible job with which I could pursue sports media. But I played in college, and obviously, as you know, I was at least trying to play overseas, right? So it was interesting. I was actually thinking about this the other day when there was a question asked to Kevin Durant about his role in that starting 5 show and why he wanted to do it. And he talked about how he wanted to do it because he wanted young basketball players to see the pros and cons of playing in the NBA. And I thought it was really fascinating when he said that, because the hardest adjustment for me by far, going from playing in college and playing against pros, because like during that time I was like working out with and working against pros all the time. And still to this day, when the pros come back into town, I work out with them. When all the college players come back into town in the summer, I work out with them. So those are the opportunities I get to still play with those players. But like going from that to playing pickup basketball is an incredibly frustrating experience in terms of like the competitive engagement. So like very rarely now do I find myself in a basketball game where like I'm really feeling the adrenaline in the challenge of the moment, where I feel like I'm going against other really high level players. The game has a certain level of competence in terms of like people knowing how to play at a high level. And I really like get my competitive basketball juices flowing. It happens very rarely now. The occasional men's league game. I play in a league here in Tucson where there are a handful of really good teams, and there's the occasional game there where I get the competitive urge. Money tournaments, I play in about 2 of those a year. I get those kind of like competitive juices flowing. Then over the summer when the college and pro kids come back and we play a little bit of a pickup in the summer, there are moments, but the vast majority of the time I go to play basketball, I feel very unfulfilled because I'm playing against like I'm just not playing against super good competition. And so it breeds laziness in me because I'm not really playing all that hard. By far the most frustrating part is like those of you guys who have played basketball at any real level will know like there's a flow that is supposed to take place in a basketball game when everybody knows what they're doing. Meaning like guys when everyone knows like when to cut, when to screen, when to throw an extra swing pass, when to relocate when the spacing is off, how to do basic things on defense, how to do basic things in transition. When you are playing with a group of players, like a pickup game, and there's 4 or 5 dudes on the floor that like don't know how to play, it like dips below like a certain like mandatory minimum amount of understanding of the game. And then the game turns into shit. And I end up being like, I leave straight up depressed sometimes from those types of games. But thankfully I get enough good basketball days a year where I still my love for the game is still engaged and I still feel challenged. Just on Sunday, a buddy of mine, Daniel Kenorke, who is, in my opinion, the best player that I've ever played against in the Tucson area. Of all of the players that I've run into over the years who are like kind of local guys, he's like he's a very good friend of mine. I've also competed with him a lot. I've played in money tournaments with him. But like every time him and I go against each other, it just brings me back to that level. And so like I left Sunday feeling very thankful that I still get to have moments like that when I play the game. But like that is by far the hardest part of the transition, going from playing at any sort of real level in basketball to the post-basketball life, is you still love the game. You still want to play. You're still super competitive. A guy like me, I'm still 33. I'm a better player now than I ever have been in my entire life. I am many times better at basketball now than I was when I was playing in college. And it just feels like a waste. It just feels useless, right? And so like that's the part that gets frustrating. But there's a flip side to that. And this is the interesting part that I was thinking about with Kevin Durant. So like when I look back at my college career, like, yes, I was competitively engaged. Yes, I was challenged. Yes, there was a lot of upside in that department. But let's be clear, it is not the same as playing truly carefree basketball. When I was in JUCO, I remember my second year, I was one of only 2 players on the roster that got a full ride scholarship, meaning they paid for my lodging, they paid for my books, they paid for my tuition, they paid for all my meals. Like I got the full deal, right? And in JUCO, that's somewhat rare. And there was only 2 guys on the team that got it. But I went to that school coming off of a foot injury that happened over the summer. And when I had the foot injury, I put on a bunch of weight in muscle because I just lifted weights all summer to try to be useful and productive while I was injured. And so when I showed up to the school, I was a little heavier, was a little slower, and I was still working my way back into basketball shape. And one of the big things was like, I didn't trust my foot. So like, even though it was healthy, I didn't like really trust it to plant. And at that time I was playing around 225 pounds. So I was like a big, heavy dude. So like, if I didn't feel comfortable planting my foot, like I just wasn't the athlete that I needed to be. And so I really struggled at the start of the season. And there was a 2-game stretch in the first like 5 games of non-conference play where after a bad game, I got called into the coach's office, and the coach was this Brazilian dude, total hard ass in a good way. Like he just was a tough dude. But he was a no nonsense kind of guy. And he was like, "What the heck, man? Gave you a full ride scholarship and you're not doing shit for me." Like, now he was more delicate about it, but like that was basically what he said. And all of a sudden, like, and by the way, he benched me didn't bench me completely, but took me out of the starting lineup for 2 games as like an attempt to try to like wake me up and get me going. And it was so interesting because like everything was fine. Like I eventually just got my legs back underneath me, and that ended up actually being my best season in college, and I ended up making the all-conference team when we got to conference play. But like after that meeting, every day I went to practice, I felt pressure and stress. Every time I was in the game and I was taking a shot, I felt pressure and stress, right? Because like there's responsibility, there's expectation that comes from this coaching staff decided to invest some of their hard to find scholarship funds on me, right? And so like I felt pressure, I felt expectation. The year after that, I went from being a consistent double-figure scorer type of guy in JUCO to playing at an NAIA team that had really good guards, like all-American guards, and they just needed me to defend and to rebound and to take wide open corner threes. And so my role completely changed again. And when that happened, it was a challenge. I remember like in the early part of the season, like every day going to practice and going to games, like what am I supposed to do? What am I not supposed to do? I was getting called into the coach's office to talk about like what shots they wanted me to take versus what shots they didn't want me to take, because obviously in JUCO I was more of a scorer, so I needed to have like my shot diet like kind of reconfigured around more of like a role player type of role. And there were dark times. Like there were times when I wasn't playing well, where it was frustrating, right? And like that's kind of like the point that I'm getting at. I vividly remember when I was done playing in college and I came home. I remember going to play pickup and feeling free. Like feeling this, like the pressure had disappeared and the expectation had disappeared. And like if I decided to jog back on defense on a specific possession, it wasn't the end of the world. If I took a bad shot every once in a while, it wasn't the end of the world. If I turned the ball over, it wasn't the end of the world. And so for the record, I loved playing in college, and I love pressure and expectation in basketball. It drives me competitively. I would take that in a heartbeat. Okay. Like I love what I do for a living. If I was not married, I would have tried more to play overseas, and I would have been playing overseas till I was 40. That's how much I love the game. But I do think there's some legitimacy to the stuff that Kevin Durant's talking about, where it's like basketball when it's your job is different than basketball when it's just for fun. And there is some reality to that. And I do think it's fascinating. But like I said, the flip side of that is like I also have a really hard time, even though I don't have pressure and even though I get to have fun playing the game I want, the way I want to play, it's just really hard for me to find really good basketball players, even in a city like Tucson that has over 1 million people. And so it's kind of interesting. That's a very, very long answer to your question there. But it's not very often that I get to talk about my personal relationship with the game. So I do appreciate the question, and hopefully that answers what you were specifically asking. How would you rank the current iteration of the Clippers if they added Kuzma plus Kawhi getting healthy? I think the middle of the pack in the Western Conference is pretty mediocre. I shouldn't say mediocre because they're all good teams, but mediocre with relation to each other. And so if Kawhi can get healthy, I think this current Clippers team with Zubac at center, with James Harden as the backup shot creator, with all of the depth of perimeter speed and talent that they have, I think right now they're just as good as anybody else in the Western Conference. It's not Oklahoma City, as long as Kawhi Leonard can get healthy and get back to form. And so, again, that's a big question mark surrounding Kawhi. An addition of Kyle Kuzma would certainly be very interesting. It'd be kind of like a lesser version of Karl Anthony Towns for this team, in the sense that like he would function mostly as an off-ball scorer, not an on-ball scorer. But I think that there's real value there, playing off of a guy like James Harden, someone who's like really aggressive in spot-up situations, both shooting threes and driving closeouts and things like that. Hi, Jason. I've always wondered, what's the one thing that separates rotation players and garbage time guys? Is it one single thing, or can it be a multitude of things? This came to mind as Jalen Hood-Schifino, who's barely played and probably won't get another opportunity. So I think about this all the time. If you are not incredible at doing things with the basketball, meaning like creating shots for yourself and for others, then you have to be incredible at everything else. And when I say everything else, I mean all of the little things. Defending on the perimeter, defending off the ball, running your lane in transition offense and transition defense, knowing what to do when you're off the ball in terms of spacing and screening and things like that. Being able to make a wide open catch and shoot three, being able to make a quick decision, driving a closeout. All of if you really break it down on with these NBA teams, there are guys who run action and there are guys who don't. And the majority of the guys on the team don't run action. And so it does come down to, with those groups, like actually being able to succeed in a small role by doing these small things that help a team win basketball games. And so like rotation players, I would just describe that as any NBA player that is capable of like doing a little bit of guarding on the ball, a little bit of guarding off the ball, a little bit of rebounding, a little bit of spot up shooting, a little bit of closeout attacking. Like those are those guys that are just rock solid in all those little things will have an easier time getting a foothold in the NBA than a mediocre ball handler will. Because mediocre ball handler is a dime a dozen. Remember Alonzo Trier? That like everyone's like, oh, why isn't Alonzo Trier in the NBA? It's not because he's not a good basketball player. He's a great basketball player. But Alonzo Trier is among the NBA ranks, a mediocre ball handler. And so if he's not elite at the point of attack defensively, elite off the ball defensively, elite rebounding, like then he's going to have a hard time finding a foothold, right? But that's the thing. Like they're going to take a Quentin Grimes, a guy who's maybe not as shifty and maybe not as natural of a scorer, but that can still do a lot of that shit. But that's a damn bulldog and can guard the hell out of the basketball, right? Like that. I've always found that sort of thing interesting. My hot take of the year was that Charlotte was going to be better than the Heat. Can we get your take on Charlotte, if they can still complete for a play-in or if injuries and roster talent is not there yet? So LaMelo's been awesome to start the year. 29 points, 5 rebounds, 6 assists, 61% true shooting. He's been a super efficient, super high volume pick and roll player. He's running like damn near 20 ball screens a game. Shooting the ball really well. He's shooting 48% field goals out of ball screens. And then he's also getting 1.3 points per pull-up jump shot. He's been really gifted at finding opportunities and angles to get 3-point shots off the bounce, and he's been making them. Trey Mann has been hooping. He's become one of my favorite players to watch in the league. They have 6 players averaging double figures. The thing with Charlotte is they're dead last in defense, and they're third to last in defensive rebounding. So if you can't guard and you can't actually grab the ball when they miss, like you're just putting yourself at a huge disadvantage every single night. And that's why I don't think the Hornets will make any noise in the playoffs at this point. Or I should say that they won't supersede the Miami Heat. 3 quick ones and then a longer one. Hi, Jason. Do you think that the chances are that the Bucks blow up this team by the trade deadline? I know it's very early in the season, but even if they turn it around, I just don't see the Bucks being a real contender with this roster and coaching staff. I think it's a very real chance that they blow things up, right? Like I think there's a good chance that they end up 2-8 after 10 games. I think they'll beat the Jazz, but I think they play the Knicks and Celtics after that. Those are probably a couple of losses, right? And so I think they're probably going to be sitting at 2-8. And if they don't, if they aren't active participants in their own survival, if they don't dig out of this hole, and if they find themselves, 15-25 after 40 games, there's a really good chance that you end up trading everybody, right? Because at that point, it's like if you're just bad and you're not close, then there's no point in investing in an older Damian Lillard at that point, right? And if you can't quickly put a contending roster around Giannis, he's going to request a trade anyway. And there are guys on that roster that are valuable to other teams around the league. Like Brook Lopez is a guy that would be valuable to some other teams around the league. I know he would. There's a lot of teams that are looking for a center. Hell yeah, one that could shoot the ball a little bit, right? Like, I mean, I even think that a guy like Chris Middleton would have some trade value if he could get healthy for a decent amount of time. So, like, there's a very real chance that this goes south and they're completely blown up before the end of the season. But there's also a real chance that they figure it out. The blueprint is the 2023 Lakers, right? They started 2-10. The 2023 Lakers started 2-10 with LeBron and AD combining to only miss 3 games in that stretch. Like, that's as bleak as it gets, right? That team made the Western Conference Finals, right? So it's like you can turn it around, and especially in that Eastern Conference where there's only 2 teams over 500 right now. And if you look at the standings, they're not really all that far out of the mix because everyone else has been so mediocre. So, like, there's a very real chance they figure it out as well. And I think we got to make sure that we quantify that. If Giannis becomes available, will the Thunder just say F it and include Chet and Jalen Williams in a deal? I'm getting to the point with Chet where I think he might be untradeable. Like, if you were listing the players that have played better than him this season, it's not very long. Like maybe 15 guys. I'm not sure, and he's only in his second full year playing in the NBA. I don't know that I would trade Chet even if it was for Giannis. Who is your pick to win the NBA Cup? Do you think winning the NBA Cup affects the winning team at all for the rest of the year? I think Boston's the right pick. I think that they're the best team playing the best basketball right now. The Thunder, I think also. I think Boston and Thunder, just like I would say for the championship, they're the 2 best basketball teams. I think Boston in particular, because of their reliance on 3-point shooting, has some vulnerability in a single elimination format, but they're also so good defensively that they can kind of level that out. So I think I'd go with Boston. Does it affect a winning team? I thought in the moment, I remember, I actually talked about this, I want to say the night, either the morning after or the night of, but I was worried as the Lakers were hoisting the trophy in the in-season tournament last year. I was like, I hope that they don't just immediately relax after this. And it was literally then. It was right after the in-season tournament that they lost 10 out of 13 games. Like, they completely fell apart right away because it was like a sense of accomplishment in the middle of a season when the other 29 teams did not have the sense of accomplishment. And for a team that already struggled with motivating itself, that ended up being a real problem. I think a team like Oklahoma City and Boston, though, I think they're professional enough, and I think they're talented enough to be able to overcome that. Last question, I thought this was really interesting. Why are offenses in general slowly moving on from pick and roll over the last couple of years? I had to look it up because I wasn't sure this was a real thing. Here's a stat to prove this, though. Teams to run pick and roll on over 35% of their possessions, okay? 2021, 12 teams ran pick and roll on over 35% of their possessions. 2022, 10 teams. 2023, 6 teams. Last year, 2024, only 5 teams in the NBA ran pick and roll on over 35% of their possessions. So there is a clear shift away from ball screens in the NBA. What's causing that? I think it's a combination of a bunch of factors, right? It's always super complicated. One, there's a lot more dribble handoff stuff as part of 5 out, right? Like there's one of the most common plays you'll see in the NBA is Chicago action or zoom action, whatever you want to call it, which is basically just big man at the top of the key, ball handler in the right corner or left corner, whatever it is. Let's call it the right corner. And then another guard who can do something with the basketball that is setting the first screen. And basically that guy screens down, and the big comes over for a dribble handoff, and the guy comes out of the corner and gets the handoff and goes to work, right? That functions as a ball screen, but it's not going to be logged as a ball screen. It's going to be logged as a dribble handoff. But it functions the same way because the guy guarding the ball, the guy coming out of the corner, is probably going to lock and trail, and that's going to get him into trail position, and then it's going to function more or less like a ball screen, right? But one of the things we've been seeing all over the place in the NBA is teams are trying to deny the use of ball screens as much as possible, right? On the side of the floor, they are icing ball screens, meaning that they're taking their defender way up to the screen side and forcing them to reject and go back towards the sideline. Situations like Chicago and zoom, like I just broke down, a lot of times the defender of the guard in the corner is just top blocking and forcing that guy to back cut, right? Which is in turn, in many cases, forcing the other guy to turn around and then come off of the dribble handoff, right? Even that guy is in many cases top locked and forced to back cut. Now the big has to turn around and look for action on the other side of the floor, right? That's really the thing. If I had to come up with a reason why beyond some of the shifts to 5 out, NBA teams got pretty good at guarding ball screens. Like as is always the case, right? Like everyone had like different strategies. Like you go back to the late 2010s, there was a lot of hedging. Like bigs were hedging. They were coming way out to stop the drive and then sprinting back into the lane, right? Then there was a lot of like guards going under, right? Guards ducking under picks and meeting the guard on the opposite side of the screen. And then when Steph Curry came in, everyone kind of had to readjust that. Then Dame started doing it. Then everyone started shooting these off the dribble threes. And then they kind of crafted this new system. And now the most common ball screen coverage that you'll see in the NBA right now is you have the on-ball defender chase over the top of the screen on any high ball screen. Side ball screens, they're icing, right? Which means they're forcing him towards the sideline and rejecting the screen. But anything up in the middle of the floor, you're chasing over the top, you're bringing the big up to the level, and you're tagging from the weak side. That is the way the vast majority of teams are defending in the NBA. Then what they do is with that weak side 2-on-1, they have the defender kind of split the difference between the two, and they rotate out of it, right? And so that has kind of become the set way to defend ball screens all around the NBA. And what's becoming clear is like, that's actually one of the easier to guard actions in the league. And so I think you're seeing a lot more off-ball action, a lot more big at the top of the key with guys cutting and playing off the ball off of him, right? You're seeing a lot. You're just in general, the post-up kind of died in the NBA for a while. That has been a big return with guys like Nikola Jokic, with guys like Alperen Şengün, with guys like Joel Embiid, with guys like Anthony Davis, right? All the switching that you see in the NBA now. That's another thing too. Another big part of why there's not as much pick and roll. There's a lot more switching. When there's more switching, that's going to lead to more ISO and post-ups, right? Like there's a lot more of like Pascal Siakam posting up a small after a switch in a ball screen, right? So like, again, I just got presented this today. I'm not trying to pretend like I know the answer, but if you guys are curious, my guess is it's a combination of like shifting to more 5-out concepts, a lot more switching, neutralizing some pick and roll, and traditional pick and roll coverages reaching the point where they're actually doing a pretty decent job guarding it at this point. It's always going to be a huge part of the game. They're still, the vast majority of teams are still running it roughly a third of the time. So it's still a huge part of the game, but it definitely is tweaking down a little bit, which I do think is fascinating. So very good question. All right, guys, that is all I have for today. As always, I sincerely appreciate you guys for supporting me and supporting the show. I hope you all have an amazing weekend. We'll see you on Monday for some power rankings.